Trust me when I say this. I am no stranger to cosmic allure of bongsoundeffect.mp4, and I played Hammer Warrior before it was popularized by addition of dictionary definition of a bad idea. I open with this because I want to make it absolutely clear that my critique comes from the place of passion, not disdain, and I oppose mechanics being dysfunctional, not ideas being explored. Warrior's maces, unfortunately, land with the grace of a brick on that previous note, bringing a lot of skills working on paper but not well in practice. Allow me to elaborate. In open world, two most valuable assets weapon can have are damage and cleave potential, the latter being either piercing projectiles, AoE, or simply attacks with high target cap. Mace has neither of these. Its power damage is comparable to power damage of sword, which is famously a Condi weapon and has multi-hitting burst, mobility and execute to remedy its lower upfront damage, while mace has none of these. Weapon having its highest damaging skill dependent on whether boss pays attention to you at all and on whether it swings at you at the right moment really doesn't work well within GW2 PvE. Further than this. Mobility, effective range, burst and pressure are what's important on PvP, making dagger and sword shine as main hand choices, both providing respectable mobility, burst and their own unique features. The only valuable thing Mace brings to the table is counterblow and lockdown, which can be remedied with stun breaks, stability, blindness and ages due to Mace's slow animations and lack of multi-hitting attacks. Mace providing the least damage and cleave in entire warrior's arsenal isn't fun to play with in open world, as picking off mobs from a group one at a time while I could just AoE nuke them instead is not satisfying. And further, when facing boss fights, Mace's low damage output and counterblows requirement to tank for it to deal damage throw a wrench into every DPS's idea of fun. In PvP, on the other hand, Mace provides lockdown and through interaction with Shieldmaster, good anti-projectile defense. However, you must take into the consideration that scariest sources of ranged damage, that is, Mesmer's Greatsword or Alice's Scepter, aren't considered projectiles and will not be reflected. Furthermore, Phantasmal Berserker technically counts as melee hit, which will cause your counterblow to end early, and for example, Alice Air Focus 5 is unblockable, which will also end your defense prematurely. The list of skills or interactions that will mess with your counterblow is quite long, and the further up you go in ranking, the less often you'll find use for this ability, as even if you find projectile-based opponent, the obvious happens. Smart Ranger knows he can end early your counterblow just by having pet active, as any melee hit from any entity, like shown with Phantasms before, will end it prematurely. To add insult to injury, Untamed literally has interplanetary dog delivery because yes. On top of which, counterblow being animation locked effectively makes it worse than Aegis in 80% of scenarios, as with or without Shieldmaster, this skill works exactly like Aegis, but also locks you into animation, preventing any actions for the duration of skills cast. You could say the same about Riposte, however it is at least better than Aegis, as without Shieldmaster it'll block multiple projectiles or any ranged attacks anyway, while Counterblow will not. That way we come back to square one. Mace provides no mobility, no burst, and no defensive utility that can't be undermined by Willbender just being Willbender, and therefore we are left with Mace's only saving grace, which is lockdown, and which sucks. Don't get me wrong, ability to stop your enemy from moving is incredibly valuable for dedicated melee combatant, but getting to melee and staying in melee are two different problems. Mace only helps with the second one, which you only have to worry about after you already solved the first one. Having no mobility at all and only having melee range CC, Mace does less than Axe to help Warrior get into his desired range. Sure, you can use Counterblow to cover your approach, but as we pointed out previously, it's basically 3 seconds of ages, while preventing you from utilizing mobility skills or any pressure tool at your disposal. And once again, you need to first get to the enemy before you get to utilize your lockdown. With mace, you relinquish your mobility and chase down you could have with dagger, sword or even axe, which makes it harder for you to get in range, and on top of that, you trade burst damage for sustained damage with some lockdown to ensure it lands. But you must consider that the longer it takes for you to down your foe, the bigger the chance something goes wrong. Having to outsource your gap closers to other weapon set or to utilities isn't end of the world, but if you're subjecting yourself to that, you might as well equip hammer and two-shot some poor bastard. Mace main hand doesn't function as proper damage dealing weapon in any of 3 game modes. Yes, we can play Mace Shield Hammer Spellbreaker and stunlock people to death, but that's not only how you get a reserved seat in Hell's Boiler Room, but it also isn't a strategy that will get you far in ranks. As the further up you go, the harder you get reminded that stability exists, social distancing counters immobile bricks, and there are many ways to one-shot warrior out of stealth. Not functioning properly as damage weapon, not being fun to use, fixing none of warrior's problems, while further exacerbating flaws of his mobility, having a defensive tool that's in its best scenario worse than Aegis, and making its only viable way to play the most toxic way warrior can be played, main hand mace truly deserves a title of warrior's worst weapon. Offhand mace, on the other hand, has something going for it at least. Tremor is one of those reliable and dependable projectiles Anet gives to warrior just so they may put 1200 range in the tooltip while keeping its effective range as low as possible. This skill moves so slow your opponent needs to be not just blind but also stupid not to dodge or sidestep it. However, ranged CC is better than melee CC, and when stars align you may catch somebody thinking they are safe. Works especially well against engineers with their slick shoes shenanigans. Just keep in mind, you'll need a gap closer to follow up on most of your already rare hits. Unfortunately, projectile block stops this already slow and easy to dodge skill, because as we know, unblockable crowd control skill with no travel time on an offhand weapon would be overpowered, especially if put next to AoE projectile denial, magnetic aura and full invulnerability. Oh wait, I forgot. It is completely fair if 90% of class player base agrees to play like shit. Next on the menu is Crushing Blow, applying up to 20 stacks of vulnerability to crowd-controlled targets. These two, in combination with Sword, create something I'd like to call fun. Offhand Mace's only undeniable downside is its lack of defensive utility. Of course, we can count Lockdown as defensive utility, as someone busy French kissing the pavement isn't in a position to fight efficiently. But in a game with stun breaks and stability, Lockdown isn't really that dependable. That isn't end of the world, especially since Fun includes Sword, which covers mobility, and from Soto onward, nothing will stop you from running Dagger Shield in another weapon set, combining best available defensive offhand with best available offensive main hand. Offhand Mace doesn't really need changes, or at least not on its own. I'd of course like reliable and dependable projectiles to get somewhat bloody fixed, and that would improve Tremor as well. Lack of defenses is noticeable, but Offhand Mace leans towards specific purpose, and if used with said purpose, its glaring downside stops being a deal breaker. Main hand, on the other hand, has no saving grace. Its damage is garbage, counter blow is worse than Aegis, and Pummel Bash gives you barely more barrier than singular activation of Unshakable Mountain. Only way Mace main hand isn't a direct downgrade from whatever you are currently wielding is when you play Berserker or your only goal is to be an asshole. And even in these scenarios there are better ways to achieve what you're trying to do. I could propose some ideas for rework, but I'm lazy and incompetent, so you'll have to wait until I find a way to make rework concept videos with satisfying quality. With that anticlimactic note, Crabface out.